Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay. Welcome. My name is Matt Harris. I'm the College Director of OTC Online, and on behalf of our team and OTC Online in general, we'd like to welcome all of you to this year's Innovation Showcase. Before we go any further, just a couple of housekeeping things. Again, I think everyone has seen, but we have coffee and cookies in the back. You're welcome to that at any time. In terms of, depending on how much coffee we drink, other needs might arise as well. In terms of restrooms, for the guys, if you head out this back door here, hang immediate left in the bathroom, you'll see the men's room is right on the other, essentially right on the other side of this wall. There's also a water fountain here as well. Ladies, your restroom unfortunately is a little farther away. If you go out this hallway and just head that way, the first opportunity you get to take a right, take a slight right, then a slight left. And you'll find it down the hall on your right. So essentially the good news is that as long as you just head that direction, there are signs saying women's restroom, so hopefully it's easy to find. But with that said, I'll go ahead and get started. We are very pleased to have Dr. Jeff Borden as our keynote speaker this afternoon. Dr. Borden serves as an e-learning consultant, a professional speaker and professor, and has spent the last 12 years serving as the chief academic leader of higher education at Pearson, where he was responsible for providing the vision and the direction for the company's strategic planning in areas such as digital learning, student engagement and retention, and learning analytics. And Dr. Borden has very recently accepted a position with St. Leo University in Tampa, Florida, as their new Associate Vice President of Teaching and Learning Innovation, also known as the Chief Innovation Officer. I just think it's a really cool title and position to have. So, but let's see very recently it starts tomorrow. So he gets to leave from after today and leave today and starts noon tomorrow. So Dr. Borden holds bachelor's and master's degrees in human communication from the University of Northern Colorado. He holds a doctorate of education in higher education leadership from Argosa University. But he considers his greatest honor to be the husband to his wife Kina and daddy to his daughter Addison. We are excited to have Jeff with us this afternoon to help us understand the connections between neuroscience, learning theory, and the ever-expanding array of educational technologies. So with that in mind, would you please help me welcome Dr. Jeff Borden.
Thanks for having me. That's a lot. I will. You did leave out one thing. I was the president of my 6th grade class 2 different times. All right. I want to talk to you today about how education really needs to be different than how you and I probably experienced it. For my entire career, I have gone around the world talking about assets like this, showing educational technology assets. This one's called Scale of the Universe. It was developed by some Finnish twins who wanted to show everything at scale, show what it looks like in comparison to everything else. So as you can see, you can get larger and larger. They actually go the other direction as well. You go smaller and smaller. They built this on a Prezi platform so that you can start to see the scale of everything. We have access to assets and technologies that we have never dreamed of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that are now in play in a regular context of our lives. At the same time, it's not just about ed tech, and we know that. See, technology is great. Technology is fantastic. Technology, you probably have some of the technology you see up on the screen. There's probably some in this room right now. Some of you are calculating your heart rate, your steps. You are calculating your caloric intake and output. I think, though, that the transformative power of some of these sorts of devices is quite remarkable. There's actually a set of schools in the southeastern part of the United States that have begun using these for virtual gym class. Students don't have to go to campus to be involved in their gym studies. Instead, they wear these devices. Now, my favorite story about this was the young man who put on one of those Nike Fuel devices, and he decided he didn't want to run that day, so he put it on his dog. And then he went outside and played fetch so that he'd get his steps up. But he didn't realize that the gym teacher was back at the school watching the monitor of all the students and got very nervous, called his parents and said, "Your son's about to have a heart attack. You should get him to the hospital right now." Because if you know anything about the heart rate of a dog, it's not the same as a person. Can't even cheat the system with these great pieces of technology. But they are out there. And they are starting to infuse themselves into the DNA of what we do. In fact, they're even starting to change things like motivation. You know what the #1 selling app is today for running? It's called Zombies Run. Zombies Run, you hook it up with your phone, and then in your earbuds, you will actually hear as you're running, run faster, the zombies are catching you, or you can slow down now, you've eluded them. And so it's a pacing tool, but it's helping people to be motivated in ways they never even thought of before. But it's not just about this stuff. There's so much more to education that matters, that's important, that we have to talk about. And I want to try to cover some of that today. Some of that starts with things we know about the brain. So to start this presentation, as any good presentation does, I want to start with a sobriety test. Does that sound good? Some of the students are nervous. No, this isn't me. Here's what I'm going to have you do in just a minute. I'm going to ask you to stand up. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I'm going to ask you to point at the opposing walls, and then put your head tilted up toward the ceiling. Then the last thing I'm going to ask you to do is to raise one leg. I'm then going to start counting to 10. If at any point during my counting you have to put that leg down, I would like you to please sit. So the only people standing at the end are those who have been able to stand on one leg with their eyes shut the entire time. Okay? Everybody with me? Go ahead and stand up. Go ahead and point at those walls, close your eyes, and tilt your head up toward the ceiling. Go ahead and raise up one leg. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, now look around at those that are standing. Look at the people that are standing. First of all, give a round of applause. They did a shot. All right, you're going to see. Now, that was what, about 10% of the room? Well, we know from research that police use this in the field with 93% accuracy. 93% of the time, in the field, you can tell if someone has been drinking based on that test. So what happened here today? Well, the question is begged, how drunk are you? Right? I'm going to guess that's not the case. Actually, instead, I don't think it has anything to do with alcohol for the majority of you. I think it has to do with this. See, we know from research about sleep that if you wake yourself up with an alarm clock, if you force yourself awake during a REM cycle, you are actually impairing yourself cognitively for 4 to 8 hours of your day. In fact, you are impairing yourself cognitively to the point of having a 0.10 blood alcohol content. That's how significant it is to wake up before your body wants to wake up. Now, this gets more and more pronounced as you get younger and younger people. We know from this research that this doesn't necessarily apply to adults. In fact, to older adults, the numbers are significantly different than what I'm about to give you. But for people under the age of 20 years old, these can be broken into categories of 3. The first third that you've got, and this is, by the way, coming from eSchool News, from Brain Rules, John Medina's great book on neuroscience, they talk about how researchers find that there are larks. About a third of the population of people under the age of 20 are larks. Larks wake up naturally. They often wake up at 5, 5:30, maybe 6. They're up, ready to go. Larks should have their learning completed by noon. They should be done trying to use their brains for learning by noon. Another third of the population under the age of 20 are night owls. You've heard this term before, I'm sure. Night owls represent a healthy amount of folks under the age of 20. They should not start learning until 10:30. They shouldn't even begin because their circadian rhythms and processes in their brain are so different. The amount of melatonin and serotonin that are created at different times to get them on schedule, we are actually forcing them awake, and many of these students are losing up to 2.7 hours a day because of forced waking up. That's the information that comes from that student health survey that East News put out. Now, the other third are the folks that can really handle that sort of 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 kind of learning schedule and be just fine. But the question is, of course, begged, why don't our schools follow that policy? Why don't our schools say, let's figure out what's best for each individual student and then help them learn in a context that's best for them, rather than saying, here's the schedule that's best for the school, here's the schedule that's best for the teacher, here's the schedule that's best because of a bus schedule or whatever else. Why don't we worry about the success of the students? My favorite study that was done, this is a bittersweet study, there was a guy who was doing his dissertation, and he got an entire district in Alabama to do this for one semester. They started school an hour late. For one semester, they started school an hour late. The average grade increased by 9.7%. The following semester, they went back to the old way because the buses couldn't handle it, the parents' schedules couldn't handle it, and the schools weren't set up for that. When we start talking about what we know versus what we do, we have to really consider a different kind of strategy. My life for the last 2 decades has been trend spotting. All I have done is try to go out and see what is happening out in the world and then try to report it back to some person somewhere, some group somewhere, to say, here's what we need to do to transform. Maybe you've written some of my pieces in Wired.com. Perhaps you've written some of my work in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, maybe in some of the different school publications that are out there. I have been trying to look ahead so that we can jump the curve, if you will. One of my favorite things that I've ever done was my last 2 years at Pearson. I was able to put together a series of videos. I hope some of you have seen them. They're called School of Thought. They're out on YouTube. It's a 21-minute short film that we broke into 3 7-minute vignettes. There's a middle schooler story, there's her brother's story in high school, and it's their mom's story in college. Then you can literally see what I believe can happen if we start to put together what we know about the brain, what we know about learning, and what we know about education technology, all into one confluence. 2, 3, 4 years out, it might look something like this. This is the mom's story. This is Simone. I want to just share with you a little piece, a little snippet of what I think might happen if we can put some of those things together in the near future. In the medical center, this was a great teachable moment.
Help! I need help down here! Hurry! I don't know what's happening. I just found him laying here. I don't know what's wrong with him.
Galileo, I need an analysis of this plant.
Aconite, also known as wolfbane, or the queen of poisons,
Stop, Galileo. Notify ER of possible toxic shock. Also bring up poison protocol.
Okay? You lost him. You can stop. Okay, Simone, what did you miss here?
I'm not sure.
Can anyone help out here? Bronchoconstriction? Yes. But remember that the airway can become constricted, especially in possible cases of poisoning, like this one. Peter, can you share your notes on this exercise from last term with Simone? Sure. Okay, Jim, you're up.
Now, will we be able to do all of that? I don't know. Google Glass is here and it allows you to see your world in an augmented view. The notion of a cave is not new at all. In fact, there are some that are suggesting that we won't need caves at all here in the next 6 to 12 months because the walls of any room can become a cave and we can begin interacting with our world in an augmented way that is very, very different. Can this stuff happen? Absolutely, it can happen if we start to bring things together the way that we know we should based on the brain, based on learning, and based on education technology. If you were to ask me who I am, this would be my Wordle. This is my education technology resume. These are the different pieces that make me up. You heard some of them earlier. I've been running a research center for the last couple of years. Some people have called it a think tank. It's kind of like Bell Labs. We just sit around looking for academic problems and academic solutions. Then we report those back to Pearson and say, maybe you should do something about this. And at the same time, I've gone around the world for 10 years speaking to groups of 50, 500, 5,000 every week. Just 3 months ago, I was over in Australia speaking to a group of 10,000 in a big stadium. We talk about transforming education. Those are the professional pieces of who I am. But you also may notice some other things up here. I'm a dad, and I'm a husband. We have a dog named Doug. He's in there somewhere. You can see that I play disc golf. I was a trumpet major when I first started in college. These are the things that make up who I am. And it's not until you take them and put them into some sort of meaningful pattern that you get a decent semblance of this guy who is standing here before you. What I want to talk to you about today are what I call the C's of education, and there are many of them. From curriculum integration, to cognition, to change management, to classroom management, to calculation. There are so many C's that we have to worry about all the time. I want to see if I can't help take this and move it into a little bit more meaningful pattern, so that by the time we're done today, we can navigate some of those C's together. I apologize for the bad pun. I know it's a horrible pun, but it kind of works, all right? So I want to talk about this through a lens of something that I call Education 3.0. When we bring together neuroscience, learning design or learning research, and education technology, good things happen. That's how we start to get towards best education at scale, meaning for everyone, not just for one student. It drives me nuts when I hear teachers say, well, if I only save one student. No, that's not enough. It's just not enough. So let's see if we can't use this to get us where we need to be for all students. And I'm going to do this through the lens of a fantastic piece that was written in Edutopia. I hope you all subscribe to Edutopia and follow it. Todd Finley wrote a great piece about 2 months ago about the transformational teacher, what that looks like in today's day and age. And he said that essentially 3 things have to be present in a good teaching and learning experience. The teacher of today needs to be an essayist, or someone who's very persuasive. Needs to be an artist, and also needs to be a scientist. I want to try to unpack some of these things as I filter it through that lens of Education 3.0 for you. So let's start by talking about what it is to be an artist as a teacher. Transformational teachers know that artful teaching without science lacks efficacy, scientific teaching without aesthetics lacks vision. David Elkind said that, and it's an excellent start to this conversation. When we think about teaching, there are a lot of things that we know need to go into that. The first thing that comes to my mind, answering the question why. If we don't answer the question why, many students will not be motivated to learn at all. Why? It's a question that, quite frankly, was rarely answered in my own educational career. When I said to my teachers, why do I have to learn history? Why do I have to learn math? Why do I have to learn grammar and literature? And why do I have to do this? Very rarely did I get an answer other than, because I said so. That's not good enough anymore, and we know it. When you get those big why questions that are big and deep and powerful and meaningful, and you can answer them, then good things happen. You know, think about some of the unanswered whys in our world. Well, I think about the Titanic. Why was the Titanic going so fast? Most researchers agree that if they had just slowed down by about 3 knots, they would have been able to avoid that iceberg. Why were they going so fast when they had gotten 8, 9 different warnings saying icebergs are ahead? Why were they going so fast? We're always trying to uncover the why. Teaching is about answering the why. At the same time, we have other considerations, though. And it's much, much deeper and bigger than just that one question. We also have to take into consideration what we know about learning. I think about Richard Light and the assessment series he did at Harvard. Richard Light, over 10 years, interviewed 1,600 students up and down the northeastern seaboard. It was a 2 to 3 hour interview. It was a 24-page interview guide. They were interviewed by him, by teaching assistants, by other teachers, by other professors. He asked students at technical colleges, at community colleges. He asked students at R1s, at Ivy Leagues, all over the place. And he asked them questions about their experiences. I'm going to share a few with you today. I really encourage you to go check out the website. You can see all 10 of his findings, and they're powerful for education. They're things that we should consider. But one of the things that he discovered was that choice really, really matters. It's hugely important. Choice is something that we all have to take into consideration. Now, how did he come to this conclusion? He asked his students, the very first question that he asked in this interview, very first, how would you rate your academic experience? Now think about that for just a moment. If you had a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate college? Think about it, and then look at a person next to you and just tell them, what would you rate your college experience? Go ahead. Okay, in a room full of educators and a room full of people who care about education, I'm going to guess that the majority of you were in the 8 range. That's my guess. But as Richard Light discovered, there were really 2 clusters of people. There were the cluster of people who said, I would rate my experience an 8 or a 9. And there was a cluster of people who said, I would rate it a 6 or a 7. He did not get a single 10. Not one person said a 10. But very few said a 5 or below. So you had 8s and 9s and you had 6s and 7s. Now, the next question that he asked turned out to be a correlation, and he didn't even plan on it being one. He had no idea this was going to happen. But the second question that he asked was very interesting. He said, how did you first pick your classes when you went to school? The answer was profound, because the 8s and the 9s almost all answered the question the same way. The 6s and 7s almost all answered the question the same way, but they answered it very differently. When he asked the 6s and 7s, how did you first pick your classes when you went to school? They said, well, when I first got to school, I took classes that I didn't want to take. I got them out of the way so that I could take the good stuff later. I took the junk, the stuff that wasn't appealing to me, the stuff that wasn't fun, and I dealt with it early so that I could just do all the great stuff at the end. Now, he asked them, of course, why was that the case? Why did you do that? And they said that's the advice they were given by an advisor, by a professor, by a brother or a sister, by a parent. Somebody had given them the advice to just get the bad stuff out of the way so you could concentrate on the best stuff later. And they had a less satisfying experience than did the students who employed the use of choice. The students who employed the use of choice, when they were asked, the 8s and 9s were asked, how did you first pick your classes when you got to school? They said, I took a class every semester that interested me. I took a class every term that was fun, that was engaging, that I enjoyed. In fact, a lot of them said, I took a class that didn't even apply to my major. It was outside of their program track, and they took it anyway. The most interesting story about this, to me, is one that Richard Light tells. It's from the very first interview he ever did. It was with a sophomore at Harvard. She was the very first interviewee of the 1600. And he said she told the story right after he asked this. She said, I have a great story about that. He said, I'd love to hear it. She said, when I first came to Harvard, I didn't know if I wanted to be a lawyer or if I wanted to be a scientist, a biologist. I wasn't sure which way I wanted to go. He goes, all right, and what'd you decide? She goes, well, I didn't know what to do until after I took a class on witchcraft in New England in the 1600s in my first semester. It was after that class that I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Don't you wish you knew what happened in that class? Because that sounds very interesting to me. She employed choice. She was powered by choice. Choice impacts motivation. When we give students more choices, good things happen. So as we start to look at brain science, as we start to look at learning research, we have to start to take into consideration some of the findings of things like this. So to that end, I'm going to give you a choice right now. I have 2 pieces of content that I can share with you. I'd like you to please get out your phone or your device, and I'm going to have you give me an answer to a question in a poll. I want to know if you are more interested in seeing how ed tech can help with collaboration, or how ed tech can help for gamification. You're going to send a text message to the number 22333. All right, send a text message to the number 22333. And depending on which thing you're interested in, you're going to send one of these numbers. 1229956 will get us to the collaboration section. 1229957 will get us to the game section. So you can tell me if you're more interested in gamification or you're more interested in collaboration. Oh wow, a lot of people so far interested in collaboration. Hey, here we go, it's coming. It's our little horse race here. We can see what happens. Gonna be close. What are you more interested in? Gamification or collaboration? I believe I capped the survey at 50, so we won't be able to go too much higher, but go on, here we go. You can vote more than once. Collaboration's winning. I'm going to call it in 10 seconds. Oh no! What choice do you want to make? Games or teams? Oh, good grief! This is as close as it's ever been. All right, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Collaboration it is. Now, please know, I'm going to leave the game slides in here, so when you get the PowerPoint deck at the end, you actually will be able to use those as well. But let's talk for a moment about collaboration. Now, ideally, this choice that you gave me, you chose this, is going to be a little bit more satisfying to you than the others. Let's see how we do. I have been a part of the Babson Research Survey on social media in education for years. I have helped formulate some of the questions. I have dealt with some of the statistical analysis. I have worked with Babson as we've done this. And something interesting happened in 2013. In 2013, for the first time ever, the teaching population mirrored the general population in terms of adoption of social media. They started using Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn at a similar rate to the rest of the world for the first time ever, which is kind of neat to me. When you ask teachers, however, how much they use those social media sources in their professional lives, you start to see that the response rate's about 55%. So that's actually a little lower than most populations of other kinds of jobs and careers. But 55% of the time, people are using primarily LinkedIn to connect professionally. But then you ask them, how often are you using social media inside of the classroom? And while the answer is up about 7% this year over last year, the answer is still only about a third of the time. About a third of the time, inside of the classroom, teachers are using social media to try to accomplish something inside of that classroom experience. Now, when you really break it down and you ask them what social media tools you're using, you're going to notice that they're not terribly social. The biggest use of social media in the classroom, wikis, podcasts, and blogs. In fact, it's really blogs. There's not much use of wikis at all anymore. So they are using social media that allows them to push content out at students in a new and unique way. It doesn't really bring in ratings and reviews and rankings, and it doesn't bring the social to social media very much. A few teachers are using things like Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, but not very many at all. And so when I think about this, it makes me a little bit sad. Not because they're not using education technology in the classroom. A lot of teachers would say, why would I do that? I don't see a good purpose for it. And you know what? I would agree with this list. When you say to me, why should I use Facebook in the classroom? I don't have a great answer. That's not a great tool. It wasn't designed for the classroom. The people who are saying, let's go to Facebook just because that's where the students are, that's a horrible answer. That's a horrible reason to go there. But there are plenty of social tools that will allow for something very important to education to happen. See, I happen to know the statistics around teams in our world. 78% of the time, you are in a team in the workplace. 78% of the time, you are with a group of people working together. In school, you're only in teams 17% of the time. That doesn't sound like a recipe for success to me. We're not doing a great job showing our students how to be good team members necessarily in our classrooms. Think about it this way. This team experience that we're about to have is the reason that a lot of people just have quit using Teams altogether. And I get it. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'd like you to please grab the hands of people around you until you have a group of 4, 5, or 6. All right? Go ahead and turn yourself into a little circle. Four, 5, or 6 people. Go ahead and grab hands. All right. Now here's the game. You are on a boat. The boat is sinking. You have got to get in the life raft. All of you will make it in the life raft except one. That one person that doesn't get in the life raft, I'm sorry, you are going to die. All right? So you have to choose in 30 seconds which one of you has to ungrasp the hands of the others and go off into the water to perish. 30 seconds, go.
Thanks, Dan.
15 seconds left.
That's right.
Everybody, you guys excited? Okay. Everyone who's getting in the raft, have a seat. All the people who are getting in the water, stand.
Thanks for trying.
All right, so first of all, give these people a round of applause. Let's get them to the team. You have a seat, you have a seat. Now, there is a problem with that team exercise, and I know what the problem is. You don't even, I'm not going to ask you, I don't want to make anybody think you're worried about offending me. I get it. I know what's wrong with it. It's stupid. Right? That is a stupid exercise. And you all know it. Why do you know it? Because you're not in a boat. And you know you're not in a boat. I guarantee there was somebody in this room that when I said, all right, who's going to get in the water and who's not, I guarantee there was at least somebody in the room who was like, whatever, I'll do it. Why? Because you know you're not going to die. It is the silliest simulation of all time, and these are the simulations that we have used to teach teams for years. We're going to put you on the moon and give you a list of 15 things that NASA says it goes in this order, and we're going to make you choose what. That's not a good way to teach teamwork. That's not how teams work anywhere else. We've got to start looking at teams realistically. Think about it this way. 50 years ago, every TV station had its lawyer, its lone champion out there trying to save the world through law. Today, you see teams of experts, groups of people that are working together collaboratively. They have each other's backs. They're trying to help each other. 50 years ago, every TV station had its doctor. It's one pioneer out there trying to save the world, the champion of the people. Today, it doesn't matter if it's a drama or a comedy, you are seeing teams of people who work together. Why? Because that's how we live. This is how we exist. 50 years ago, this was the lone teacher. This is a shot from Purdue University, 1954. You can see the solitary teacher standing up in front of the chalkboard, the students at the desk. Today, oh, crud. We have the same thing. Yeah, the chalkboards are now whiteboards, but it's the same thing. So we're not doing a great job modeling team behavior. We don't have a lot of team teaching going on to model that behavior, which is really a shame. It's really unfortunate. There's some amazing teachers that should be working together out there. But at the same time, what are we teaching? Are we teaching students how to use teams effectively? I happen to know, as a rhetoric and communication professor, the predominant formulation in books today, if you go and you look at every organizational or business communication book, you're going to find this reference. Saying to students, this is how teams go. This is the order, the natural order of things. There is forming, storming, norming, and performing. And if you happen to be Canadian, you add in adjourning. I don't know why they say it that way. But that's what they say. The problem with this right here, this parameter, is it's flawed. It's flawed greatly, actually. This is not something that we should be teaching. Forming, first of all, doesn't matter. The group forms, period, whatever. It is. It either exists naturally or somebody puts it together, but it forms. Then the next step, the big step, brainstorming, is a bad idea. Most people storm ineffectively. In 1956, a man named Osborne was the person who came up with the notion of brainstorming. He wrote it in an article. He'd been working on it since the 40s. But he wrote an article, then he wrote a book about the power of brainstorming. The instant he wrote that, within 3 months, 2 articles came out in business journals saying, this is a bad idea. This is not going to help creativity. It's not going to help innovation. Instead, it's going to quell innovation. It's going to quell creativity. Because most people do not brainstorm in ways that they're supposed to. They use it inappropriately. Now, there's a guy out there named Scott Borden. Borden is actually a communication and organizational specialist. And he doesn't know that he goes all the way to the extent to say that brainstorming is bad. But he does admit that brainstorming, if not done well, can really screw you up. Let me show you 4 laws that Borden says about this. First of all, Nothing matters if your room is filled with idiots. Think about it. What happens when a bunch of stupid people brainstorm? Nothing. Nothing happens. All right? So that's one issue. Number two, brainstorming is designed solely for volume. It is not designed for quality. That comes later. But most people, think about how most people handle brainstorming. They want to get people in a room for 30 minutes until they come up with the idea. That's not how brainstorming is ever designed to work. The person leading the idea generation has to be significant, because most leaders in a brainstorming session find that theirs are the only ideas that get accepted. That's what leaders do. They push, they give, they suggest, and then ultimately everyone agrees with that. And debate is crucial. But there's a problem with debate, just like there's a problem with leadership. If you look at brain science, how introverted people versus how extroverted people handle brainstorming situations, or any situation for that matter, are very different. Introverted people have a different subset of neural pathways that they deal with when they're taking in information and they're trying to communicate it back. So an introverted person, you know what they need? Time. They need time to let things settle, let things percolate, and then they need a good avenue by which to move them forward. What happens in a brainstorming session? The extroverts talk, and talk, and talk. And it's the extroverts whose ideas are taken, because they're the only ones who have those ideas. Why? Because they shoot, fire, aim. Whereas the introverts need time to let things settle and then come back to it later. Brainstorming is a bad idea, and yet this is what we teach about teams all the time. Do we teach our students about all the group roles that they need in an event in order to be satisfying both socially as well as with task? That there has to be roles that are based on task and roles that are based on socialness? Do we show them this? Or do we say this, hey, I've got a group project for you. Here's a group project. Go to the library. Good luck. Because that's not a good formula for success. Do we talk to them about the kinds of roles that are negative, that they need to try to get out? Do we tell them how to disrupt that, how to remove those, how to vote them off the island? Do we give them that opportunity? I don't know that I see that happening very much. If you don't like these roles, pick one. Belbin's great. Belbin's 9 roles are great. If you've got Belbin's 9 roles represented in a group experience, you're going to have good socialness, good task, satisfaction. The product is going to be strong. That's powerful. That's great. Now, I know a lot of people, when they start talking about group work, they don't even know how to teach these things to students in order for the students to use them effectively. How do we know this? 1999, CSU ran a series of experiments around groups, and they asked students, they said, you're about to graduate. What kind of organizational structure are you going to go into? 97% of students said this one, the line, the chain. You know how many organizations use that strategy? 2%. 2% have a person in charge, a second in command, a third, a fourth, a fifth. Nobody uses that anymore. Most organizations use one of the others. Here's what we know about group work, about teamwork. You should choose a different strategy depending on how much time you have, how much satisfaction you're after, how much interaction you want. You should actually choose a different organizational pattern depending on what you're after. We know that. Are we teaching our students this in order for them to be successful when they leave the institution? Now, I know a lot of people say, I can't do groups. I don't know how to assess individuals in a group. That's a problem for me. Technology can help us with this. See, technology can actually unpack what's going on in that group. Technology can give us these spider graphs so that you can start to see who is communicating a lot to other people and who is communicating a little. And then what the impact is. In this case, you can actually see which students are failing the class versus which students are passing the class. Of course, the students who are not communicating at all are the ones that are failing the class. And the students who are communicating a lot are the ones who are passing the class. You can start to look at this based on teachers, how much work the teacher has to do in a group-heavy environment versus the environment where they leave all groups out. You can then start to unpack it and demystify all of the discussions. You can have your students have a conversation with technology, and then you can look at how the ideas emerge, how the concepts emerge, out of these word clouds, these thematic and semantic ideas that really start to emerge. Then you can filter on top of this any kind of rubric you want. You can talk about convergence or divergence. You can talk about explanation, elaboration, extraction, expansion. You can start to put these things on all the conversations your students are having. Or you can have your students talk in class for 10 minutes. It's very, very different when we use what we know versus how we experience it. A lot of people don't do groups because it's so hard to deal with individuals. Technology can help there too. This is my favorite group tool. It's called Trello. It's free to use. If you're a Google school, you actually have access to it right now. But you can also get a non-Google account for it. Trello is what I use in my classes for my students. And I've got group projects in every class I teach. It's that important. And my students, instead of having the old he said, she said happen at the end of the term, instead of the, well, so-and-so bullied us and took all the ideas for themselves, or so-and-so left and didn't participate at all. I don't have that in my classes, ever. At the end of certain time periods, I say, hand me your Trello report, where I get to see who is supposed to do what, which things are done and which things are not. I get to see the members that are here. I get to see the activity that's going on. I get to see all of this in black and white. I get to see that student A didn't submit something so that student B couldn't complete their work. I can see it. It's right there. I don't have to have a conversation with the students where they're defending themselves against some sort of unfair treatment. It's all right there. My experiences with groups are easy when I start using education technology. And ultimately, that's what ed tech should help us do anyway. It should make our lives easier. We shouldn't use it just for the sake of using it. That has to do with the art of teaching. Let's also talk, though, about the science of teaching. This great quote from an 8th grade teacher: the best teachers are artists who know the science of teaching. Couldn't be more spot on. So let's talk a little bit about that science. For just a moment, I would like you to imagine that you have been given one of the amazing number of grants that are out there this year to develop a new learning space. Right now in higher education, there's about $35 million out there to be had for developing a learning space. In K-12, there's double that. You can design your own classroom if you get one of these grants. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you've done that. You have been given $1 million. And with that $1 million, you can develop a space that is perfect for students to retain, to be creative, to be social, to be whatever it is that you think is important. I would like you, with some of the people around you, to please start strategizing. And just for a moment, we don't have a ton of time, but just start to think about some strategies you would employ if you were given money to create a brand new learning space. Okay? Go ahead. Okay, I apologize. I know you could probably talk about this for a while. It's enjoyable, it's fun to strategize these things. I just want to see if I can get 2 ideas from some of your group experiences there just for a moment. Can I get just somebody shout out one of their ideas? No desks. Who said that? Can you expand on that? Why? Good? Awesome. So you have removed a physical barrier of that desk that can be between you. Excellent idea. One more. What's one other idea?
Flexible spaces.
Flexible spaces. Tell me about that.
Areas where you have places where they can collaborate, where like a screen, that they can have shared screens to do. Other areas like she's talking about where they could sit around and talk, or other areas where they can perform or do audiovisual stuff or.
Good. Multimodal.
Yes.
Yeah? All right. So those are just two ideas. And first of all, I'm going to guess that a lot of you came up with something similar, all right? But second, I was watching you do that exercise, and I saw what I was hoping to see. You were engaged. Almost every person, with the exception, I think, of one person in the room, almost all of you were actually working on that. You were talking about it. Your hands started to move. Your eyebrows started to go up. You sat up in your seats. You started paying attention to one another. I started watching you get engaged. You know why? Because I tapped into the science of the brain. See, I know a couple of things about the brain. First of all, I know that the brain is social. Matthew Lieberman at UCLA has found that we actually have a social center of our brain. This social center is connected all the time. From the time you wake up in the morning until the time you go to sleep at night, the only time that the social part of your brain, that part of your brain that is craving social contact, the only time that it disconnects is when you are given a task. You're given a task, you do the task, and as soon as you're done with that, you come up and your social side kicks on right away, instantly. Matthew Lieberman also found if you're able to create a task that happens to also be social, guess what happens? Comprehension goes up, retention goes up, good things happen educationally. And yet, here we are, so many years later, still having all of our students do independent work at independent desks, sitting, doing stuff by themselves. Matthew Lieberman went on to see just how powerful this really was, and he found something interesting. You may have seen this before. It's called e-ball. Have you seen e-ball? Matthew Lieberman brought people into his lab, and he put them in an fMRI machine. And he hooked them up to the machines that would literally calculate their brain activity, who would watch the parts of the brain that lit up and the parts that did not. And so here's what he said to them. He said, you get to control this hand right here. Okay? This is you. And what I want you to do is I want you to play ball, just play catch, with two other people that are in two other fMRI machines somewhere else. Well, that wasn't entirely true. The other two people didn't exist. They were being controlled by Matthew Lieberman and by his assistants. And so the people went in and they sat in these fMRI machines and they started having a catch. They started just throwing the ball to one or to the other, whatever. And then something interesting happened. At the 3-minute mark, Matthew Lieberman changed the game. At the 3-minute mark, Matthew Lieberman stopped throwing them the ball. In fact, he never threw them the ball, ever again. Now, if you're like me, the first time I saw this, I started to get uncomfortable. I was thinking, throw the ball. Just, come on. Give him the ball. You're being rude. Give him the ball. Right? He didn't do it. He never gave them the ball. Within a few seconds, a part of the brain was starting to light up, and within a minute, it was engulfed. And that part of the brain that lit up was the pain center of the brain. Your brain experiences pain socially exactly as if it were pain it was experiencing physically. People's brains are having pain in the same locations when they are snubbed socially. Social pain is real. Social pain is significant. When we have others that are not being social with us, it hurts us. In fact, you can quell that. You know how to deal with it? How to deal with social pain? Take Tylenol. Tylenol will actually quell social pain just like it quells the same pain from when you stub your toe or you hit your thumb with a hammer. That's how significant pain is in our lives. Social pain and physical pain are the same to our brains. We need socialists. At the same time, I want to go back to Richard Light's survey at Harvard. My favorite question that Richard Light asked, and that was answered by the students, the question that was asked was, what was your favorite class? Now just think about that for a minute. What's your favorite class of all time? These students, 97% of the time, said essentially the same thing without ever using the same words. 97% of the time. You know what they said? My favorite class was the class that was hard. It was unique. It was unusual. It was problem-based. It was inquiry-based. It was the class where we didn't have set questions and answers, where we had to come up with the questions and then we had to come up with the answers. It was the class where we had a mock trial during the class. It was the class where we fed the homeless at the end of the semester. It was the class where we presented to the board of Macy's about a new marketing strategy for them. It was the class that was social. It was the class that was contextual. It was the class that tied things to real life. Not a single student said a lecture, not one. The 3% that did not say something like this said it was a lab. Conflict, or what Light called structured disagreement, is really sitting at the heart of this. To create a problem and then allow the students to solve that problem is important for education. It matters. Now, I realize that what I'm saying here is going to go against some perception that folks have. I know that. What I'm about to say is something that is anti-education to some people. Perception is really broken into two categories. There's internal perception, that's the stuff that you believe to be true, you believe about yourself, you believe about your ideas. And then there is external perception, those things that other people believe about you or about your ideas. And those two things don't always overlap. Now, I'm going to have you do an exercise to show you what I mean here in just a second. But before I do that, let me show you a Venn diagram of these two things butting up against each other at my house. Okay? This is what it kind of looks like where I'm from. My wife does not always agree that I'm as funny as I think I am. I did stand-up comedy through my master's program. That's how I worked my way through college. And I had a pretty solid 12 minutes down at the comedy club that I would do on Friday nights, Saturday nights, and Sunday nights. I was okay at it. And so I feel like I know an audience, and I know funny. And other times I will say to my wife, I'm really sorry, honey, I just can't turn it off. And without missing a beat, she will look at me and she'll go, why don't you try? No, not that funny. Now, let me show you this at work in your life, okay? Let me show you the difference between internal and external perception. I want you to think of your favorite ice cream flavor. All right, your favorite ice cream flavor of all time. Just think of, keep it yourself. If you could only have one ice cream flavor the rest of your lives, what would it be? Now that you've got it, I want you to look at somebody close to you. I want you to look them up and down really carefully. And then I want you to say, I'll bet your favorite ice cream flavor is. And then I want you to tell them what you think it is. But here's the catch. I want you to tell them why. Why did you say that must be their favorite ice cream flavor? Okay? Go. Okay, excellent. I want to tell you what I just witnessed. All right, this is what I just saw. Most of you have the same reaction. I love this reaction. I love this exercise. I've done this all over the globe. The Chinese audience I did this with, the German audience I did this with, everyone does it the same way. It's great. But here's what you just did. Most of you, when the person said, your favorite ice cream flavor must be, blah, blah, blah. Now, I can't hear what they said. But I can tell that it was wrong because most of you did this. Most of you went, ha, no. This is good. But two people in this room, I watched two people have my favorite reaction. I love this reaction. Two people in this room did this. The person said, your favorite ice cream flavor must be, they said something, and the other person went. You could tell they were offended. Now, again, I don't know what to say. Chunky monkey, vanilla, I think people are like, what am I playing? What does that mean? That's the difference between internal perception and external perception. And when it comes to education, many of us have internal perceptions based on what we feel, based on what we've experienced, but that doesn't necessarily make it so. I think about this guy, Mark Edmondson. Professor Mark Edmondson is a professor of literature in Virginia, and he wrote a piece in the New York Times about 2 summers ago that basically said this. It said, look, can't we all just agree education technology doesn't work? EdTech is not for most people. EdTech is not why students go to school. It's not why they go to class. It's not why they're trying to get a degree. We know, this is him talking, he said, we know the reason students come to college is so that they can find the great lecturer. They are after the great lecturer. That a great lecturer can inspire, and a great lecturer can motivate, and a great lecturer can change lives. And that's what students want. Now, I didn't agree with that. Right? That's not my line of thinking. But I examined it a little bit. I always try very hard to look at the contrarian position. And I found some interesting data that might back him up a little bit. The National Survey of Student Engagement shows us that 50% of the time, students are being lectured at. So somebody agrees with him. 50% of all educational experiences in high school and college are lecture. Those aren't good odds. 25% of the time, almost 30, somewhere between 25 and 30%, they're being tested. That leaves us with about 20% of our time to do what? So as I look at lecturing, I really started to examine it. It's still prevalent in our systems, and I wanted to know why. But I began looking, and I started finding there's some research that shows that my thoughts, my original thoughts, may be right on. The Science Insider wrote this this year. Lectures are not just boring. A student that's in a lecture-based program are 1.5 times more likely to fail, and they are going to get a half a grade lower on an exam on average. Lecture-based classes are not successful. I think about this guy, Dr. Eric Mazur. If you've never had a chance to hear him, take it if you get it. He was Harvard's Lecturer of the Year twice. Eric Mazur is a powerful speaker. He's poignant, he's funny, he's entertaining, he's great. He was voted by his students as one of the best lecturers at a place that's supposed to be filled with great lecturers. And at the end of the day, he realized that it didn't matter because his students weren't learning. He started to do some research to see how much of the information they remembered year after year, semester after semester. It was almost none. So he did what any Harvard professor would do. He designed a machine that would measure their brain activity, and he hooked them up to it for a week, as you do. So I'm going to show you a picture of a Harvard student's brain for a week. I'm going to show you their activity metric for a week. Now, I can only show you one, but there were 70 pictures just like this. Go to his website, Confessions of a Converted Lecturer, and you will see all 70 of them listed there. But please trust me when I say all of them look almost the same. This one that I'm going to show you is a great representation of all the students at Harvard during 1 week as far as their brain activity is concerned. You ready? This is a Harvard student's brain during a week. I'd like you to pay close attention to what happens to their brain when they go to class and listen to a lecture. They look dead, don't they? In fact, the only other time during the week that a Harvard student's brain has that little activity is when they are watching television. Interesting to me is how much more activity there is when they're sleeping. I think you want to get the most bang for your buck. You sleep during the lecture. That's really where it's at, right? The lecture is not the end-all, be-all of education. It's just not. Now, please hear me. I get the irony here. I'm lecturing. I understand it. But you know the difference? This is not a lecture I've given once. I didn't give this last semester, 16 weeks ago. This is a conversation that I have had with educators over 20 years. I never put more than 10 or 15% new material into each session as I go, because I know what works. I know what matters. I know what's relevant. I watch audiences, and I take the stuff that works, and I keep doing it, and I add some new stuff to see if it works, and the stuff that doesn't work, I throw it out. I craft this over time. This is very much like how I work my stand-up routines. To get up to 12 minutes, it took me about 1.5 years to get 12 minutes of good material. That's the kind of lecture I'm talking about. The lecture that is rare and strategic, not the lecture that is every day droning on and on. It's just different. So as we talk about the science of teaching, we've got to look at choice. We've also got to look at conflict. And then here's how we can combat it. We can combat with patterns. Do you guys see the words? Does everybody see them? Here's the hidden part. Do you see the horses? That's actually the pattern you're looking for. See the horses that make up the words? You are pattern finding right now. And pattern finding is a powerful thing for your brains. John Medina writes about this in his book, Brain Rules. It's my second time talking about it. It's that important of a work for our lives. You should all read this. The 10 things we know about the brain to be true. But one of the things, one chapter is dedicated to pattern finding. Pattern finding is like candy for our brains. It is the building block of all learning. When you are discovering patterns, good things happen. Here's a game that I play with my little 7-year-old daughter. It's just a find it game. You go into this messy environment on the iPad, and you have to pick out find the magnifying glass, find the sewing machine, find whatever the thing is. This is excellent for her brain. This is setting up neural patterns for her brain. Neural pathways that her brain needs are being formed and designed by pattern recognition. See, pattern recognition will not just save your life. You see the line, right? Because he sees you. Pattern recognition is not just about life-saving. See, something happens when you recognize a pattern that is unlike any other thing that happens during your day. You release two chemicals in your brain. Two hormones are released at exactly the same time. You release dopamine and you release endorphins at the same moment when you first discover a pattern. When a pattern becomes obvious to you for the first time, you are relaxed and excited at the same moment. Do you know how unusual that is? Relaxed and excited at the same time. And John Medina points out that when you discover these patterns, something amazing takes place inside your brain. Now, there's a reason that we've been using patterns to teach for years. When people start to uncover these patterns, and they can be pictorial, they can be word-based, they can be theoretical, whatever the patterns are, the first time that you really understand that pattern, that's when a good teacher exploits it. They pounce. See, when most people discover a pattern, think about most educational contexts you've ever been in. Here's been my experience. When I have finally uncovered the pattern and I said back to the professor, oh, here's the pattern, is that right? Here's what they usually say, hey, fantastic, you got it. Go ahead, you can leave. No, that's not right. John Medina shares with us that you've got a 7-minute window of opportunity where the brain is supercharged. It is hypercharged. It is ready to take in more information. It is ready to connect other dots. It is ready to make that pattern useful and meaningful and use it. That's the time when we have to jump. When you start to make sense of these patterns for the first time, that's when you start to act. Do you guys see the faces in this picture? If you can't, I'll show you a few of them. There's 22. Medina says that this is such a powerful concept that he recommends lining the walls of your hallways with pictures like this, so that your students, as they're walking down the hall, they find a picture and think, what am I looking at here? Oh, and they find the pattern, and they walk into the classroom supercharged. He says it's that important. We've got to start thinking about going away from the lecture and including much more pattern-based recognition for our education. That's what leads to critical thinking, that's what leads to problem solving, that's what leads to the kind of things we're after in education. At the same time, the other thing that I employed when I started working with you a moment ago was not just choice, it was not just conflict, and it was not just the dealing with patterns. It was also with motivation. If you have not read Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, you need to pick this book up. It is a read every educator should make. Mindset talks about some important things, some very important things. For example, it talks about the growth versus the fixed mindset. It talks about things like math. You know how our country likes to say we're not numbers people, we're not math people? You know how ludicrous that is? We're one of the only countries that says that. We're one of the only sets of people in the world that seem to believe you have a propensity for knowing numbers. That's crazy. She not only talks about that, though, she also talks about the power of motivation and how intrinsic motivation trumps extrinsic motivation always. Always. I gave you a task. I said, hey, people who care about education, I want you to build a better educational context. I want you to build a better classroom teachers. And what did you do? You jumped in. You said, I can do this. I'm interested in this. This is something that matters to me. And so you acted. You know who will do the same thing? Your students. When you give them something that they care about, then suddenly the rest of it makes perfect sense. It's something that I call do education. Dan Meyer is a math teacher who came out of California, and he was a high school science and math teacher. He went on to Stanford to get his degree, and now he goes around the country talking about how to change and improve science and math education. And he would argue with you that one of the biggest problems with our education system is that we don't have do education, we have tell education. And he says, here's how you can tell that that's the case. This is an end of grade exam question for the state of California. A student needs to get these kinds of questions right their junior year in order to get into their senior year in California. Now, Dan Meyer would tell you the biggest problem with this question is simple. Everything you need to solve this problem is in this problem. When does that happen in real life? Ever? Ever. When was the last time somebody said to you, hey, I've got a problem, I'm going to need some help with it? You said, all right, tell me the variables. Well, there's variable 1, there's variable 2, there's variable 3. Oh, luckily I've memorized the correct calculation. So I can tell you, because of those variables, that with this calculation, here's your answer, done. It doesn't work that way. Never. That's not how it works in life. Why should school be any different? What Dan Meyer suggests you do is you strip away all the excess stuff and you start here. Now, he's got students who hate math. He's got students who say, I'm not a numbers person, I'm not a math person. And he says, that's fine. Let's just talk about this. Which skier is going up the steepest incline? Well, the students have an opinion about that. And so some of the students are like, A, no, it's C, Mr. Meyer. No, it's A, no, it's C. And then finally, one of the students will say, Mr. Meyer, how tall is that mountain? We'll say, why do you want to know that? Well, if I know how tall the mountain is, can't that help me determine which one of those is steeper? He goes, okay. Let me tell you how to figure out how tall the mountain is. And so they do that. And so then they argue again. Then one of the students says, well, then it's obviously A. And another student says, no, then it's obviously C. No, it's A, no, it's C. And then finally, another student will say, Mr. Meyer, we know how tall the mountain is. How far forward are they going? And Dan Meyer will say, why do you want to know that? And the student will say, well, if I know how tall the mountain is, and I know how far forward they're going, can't I calculate an angle? And Dan Meyer will say, you want to calculate an angle? And the students go, huh, I guess I do. And then he shows them how. That's do first education. Now, Dan Meyer uses technology throughout his do education model. Let me let you hear from Dan Meyer himself. This is actually something that Dan has done a great thing. This was on a TED Talk. You may have seen it there, where he talks about do education or starting with problems.
The problem is the first thing on that student's mind. I want to make that question irresistible to a student, so they have to know the answer. And I take that interest and I layer math on top of it. Our goal in my classes is to let math serve conversation, to let math serve prediction and betting and arguing, not the other way around. We don't do all of that to serve the math. So here's an example, is I took a flip camera out, little cheap camera, put it on a tripod, and I shot a basketball shot in front of it. And then I took that video file and I just carved it up and I made this half video where the ball kind of strobes in the air and then hovers halfway between me and the hoop. And that's a good moment because I don't have to ask the question there. You know what the question is. The students are feeling the question, is that ball going to go in the hoop? And from there, I can take bets and predictions. We all put a guess on the record. I show a few more shots, some that obviously are going to miss, some that may make it. And from there, you want to know the answer. Am I right or wrong? And so I throw you into a simulator where you are modeling the parabola on top of that, and you can see, like, okay, it's going to continue and miss or go in. And the best part about using multimedia in these instances, one of the great parts, is that I don't have to turn to the back of a teacher's edition and tell you, well, the textbook says you're right. Or as the teacher, I say, you're right. We just watch the end of the video. And from that, I can be a co-learner with my students. Like, we're working on it here, and they're asking me, am I right? And I'm saying, beats me. Let's find out. It's a good moment. Another example is the...
That is do first education. See, for years, we have taken these sorts of assets, and we have said to our students, let me tell you what's important. Now go practice. Instead of the other way around. This is true flipped learning, by the way, where we say to our students, here's a problem. You help me find it, or I'm going to suggest one, and you tell me if you think it's a problem. And when the students go, yes, that's a problem, say, okay, student, I want you to fix it. Go fix that problem. And you know what students will do? Because they've got energy and enthusiasm, they'll go, yeah, let's fix that problem. Professor, I don't know how to fix that problem. And so you say, not a problem. You know what? Let me give you some assets that you can use to help you figure this out. You can use me as a consultant to help you figure this out. That's teaching. That's really what we're after. So we're actually communicating with the students in a teaching and learning scenario rather than saying, I am the oracle of all knowledge. And I'm here to tell you, this is important. Believe it, act on it, now go practice it. See the difference? For years, we have said, tell, show, do, review, ask. You may have heard this before. Tell, show, do, review, ask. You put those 5 things into an educational context, and good things happen. My problem with this, we got the order wrong. We put tell first, and as a result, we got a lot of telling. We got a healthy amount of asking and very little else in between. I think we need to replace this with do, show, tell, review, ask. Do first, followed by the others. That leads us to our last set as we talk about being an essayist or a persuasive person. Transformational teachers treat a class like a carefully crafted persuasive essay. That's something that we need to do to prove to our students the importance of what it is we're showing them. So that tells me, first of all, we have to go back to our brain science and realize that we cannot start with words. You know who values words more than anyone else? Educators. Study after study shows that. We believe words are powerful. They're meaningful. They're dripping with context. Most people don't care about words nearly as much as educators do. Medina, in his book, actually started to prove this. He brought people into his lab, and he started to give them lists of things. He gave them lists in a couple forms. He told them lists of words. He also showed them lists of words, and then he showed them pictures. And then he asked them after the fact how many they could remember, and something remarkable happened. When he showed them a list of words, and then he asked them 3 days later how many words they remembered about 10%. When he then asked them about 90 days later how many they remembered 3%. However, when he showed them pictures, up to 2,500 pictures at one setting, and he asked them 3 days later how many they remembered, they still remembered 90% of those pictures. When he asked them 90 days later, they still remembered 67% of those pictures. Pictures trump words, just like intrinsic motivation trumps extrinsic motivation. Pictures are powerful. Imagery is powerful. We need to tap into that and make use of it. Online learning should not be so text-heavy, not so text-centric. This is something that we know, and that bandwidth has actually made it possible for us to achieve, and yet still, so many of our e-learning courses are walls of glass. They're just text, text, and text, and text, and text under that glass. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to give you a list of words. I want you to remember as many as you can. I'm going to then ask you about these words in just a couple minutes. Let's see how many of them you can memorize, okay? You're only going to see them for a short period of time, so please memorize as many as possible in this short period. Okay, everybody ready? Go. Time. What I just gave you was a declarative list. A list of facts or events, something like that is declarative information. Now, I happen to know that if I had coupled that with non-declarative information, if I had added some sense elements around that, if I had given it some context with a story, if I had done something to give you some other way to formulate it, you would remember it better. Why? Because that information is traveling down into the hippocampus of your brain. And as it travels down into the hippocampus, those two pieces of information that are coupled together, they actually part company in the hippocampus. And the sense element of the context is held in one place, and the fact is held in another place. And for you to remember, you just have to pull out the one that makes the most sense. Yes, believe it or not, more information is necessary to remember more. We know this to be true. It's called visual indexing. That's what the process is called. I can mess around with your visual indexing. Let me show you how. I'm going to show you another list. I want you to read it out loud. I want you to read it loudly. So go ahead and shout this out. I want you to read it top to bottom. And I want you to read it as quickly as you possibly can. Okay, fast. Speed is the key. So out loud, top to bottom, speed. I just don't want you to read the words. I want you to read the color. Okay? Go.
Red, yellow, green.
Yeah. That's not easy, is it? I heard somebody screw up on word 2. The Stroop test, for my psychology teachers in the room, you know this. Now, the reason the Stroop test is so difficult is because I'm asking you to take two very old competing memories and choose one over the other. You learned the symbols for color at about the same time you learned the symbols for words. And to try to bring one out over the other one in competition is very hard to do. That's how we know visual indexing is so powerful. What we're doing here is training neurons. The one on the left is a trained neuron. That is a piece of information that was given to someone in more than one way, more than one time. Notice on that neuron, not only is it more agitated, it's got more of those little, they're called neurites, those little tendrils coming off of it, trying to find their way to another neuron so that they can create a neural path. That's exactly what they do. The neuron on the right is about to die. It's a piece of information that was given one time in one way. As we know more about declarative and non-declarative information, we know that when we start to get both together, we involve more parts of the brain. We involve the cerebellum, we involve the amygdala. When we put more of our brain on remembering, we remember better. That's what it's all about. Let's see how you do with my little test, all right? If you agree with the statement I'm about to make, go ahead and raise your hand, all right? If you think that the word candy was on the list, go ahead and raise your hand. Good. The answer is yes. I didn't fool you guys. If you think the word car was on the list, go ahead and raise your hand. Nobody? All right, good. If you think the word sweet was on the list, go ahead and raise your hand. No. Sweet was not on the list. Sweet is what the list was of. They were sweet things. But sweet was not on the list. See, you know what you did? You added non-declarative information to a declarative list. You added context. You filled in some of the holes yourself. That's exactly what every learner does. Every learner does that. So we've got to think about learning in a different way. We start approaching it in a multimodal fashion. John Medina said this at the end of his book. As I was writing Brain Knows What Hit Me, if you want to design a learning environment that's directly opposed to what the brain is naturally good at doing, you would design something like a classroom. We've got to get out of that mold to get to Education 3.0. And let me try to sum it up and synthesize it by saying this. About 7 years ago, a video came out. This video that came out was called Have You Been Paying Attention? And it basically talked about how different our world is today, how much it's changed and shifted because of the internet. And it was directed at educators, and it made a statement in there. It said, students today expect to be able to create, consume, remix, and share. Now, at the time, I was reading EduBlogger. Now, 7 years ago, EduBlogger, there was one. This was not a common term. There was a single EduBlogger, and nobody knew if EduBlogger was a man or a woman. Nobody knew if it was K-12 or higher. Nobody had any idea who EduBlogger was. EduBlogger just sort of sat back and talked about education. And some things they really despised, and some things they really liked, and they just wrote about it. And I used to follow this blog. EduBlogger did not like that video. Not at all. EduBlogger said this: have you seen this garbage? Educators need to teach students to be original, have original thought, do original work. Imagine a world where using other people's work to create your own was okay. We would never have gotten past the toaster to see the benefits of the microwave. We'd have never gotten past swing music to see amazing original works like Elton John's The Lion King. I don't know. Or other similar. Maybe that tells us something about EduBlogger. But EduBlogger did not like this notion. Now, I told you, I like to read contrarian pieces. I like to see, maybe that's true. Maybe EduBlogger is onto something. Is create, consume, remix, and share, is that really just a license to plagiarize, a license to cheat? But as I'm thinking about this, and I'm really, really thinking about it, I can't get the stupid Lion song out of my head. You know when that happens? You get that song in there, it's like, it's buried in there. It's like an Alabama tip. You can't get it out. So I'm trying really hard. So I got out my guitar. I play the guitar. And I put down the track for The Lion King. So these are the chords. I don't know if you remember this. It came out in 1996. I just started playing. Can you feel the love tonight? You guys remember the song? Yeah? Came out in 1996. So I'm playing and just trying to get it out of my head. I'm just trying to deal with it and put it away. Well, something weird happens. As I'm singing this song out loud, and I'm thinking create, consume, remix, and share, is it cheating? Is it plagiarism? Is it cheating? Is it plagiarism? I heard something really disheartening. Something else popped into my head that came after 1996. Say tonight, and fight the break of dawn, come tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be gone. And then I heard this. You're beautiful. Oh no. You're beautiful. And then I heard this. If I could, I would. I'll go wherever you may go. They stole it. They stole it from Elton John. They ripped off his chords. They put their own lyrics on it, and they made their own song. In fact, I don't know if you remember this. Adele won a Grammy for this. Remember the song when she sang, "Never mind, I'll find someone All right? And I started thinking, crud, EduBlogger's onto something here. This is right. EduBlogger had something to say. And then I heard something weird, something I wasn't expecting, something disheartening. See, as I kept playing it, eventually, this popped into my head. Harry Truman, Doris Day, Red China, Johnny Ray. That's right, Billy Joel! Billy Joel wrote this in 1989, 7 years before The Lion King. Elton John stole it from Billy Joel. I knew it. It had to be. So I'm playing it, and I'm kind of excited now. And I'm like, hey, Billy Joel, I know a Billy Joel song. And then, unfortunately, I heard this. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I will be right here. Richard Marx sang that at my prom. No joke. He sang it at my prom. And I thought, that can't be. I can't let Richard Marx have the credit here. He cannot have created the most amazing, prolific song in the last 2 decades. So I kept playing it. And I found, I think we're alone now. It doesn't seem to be. Tiffany! It can't be Tiffany, right? Yeah? See, that's why you shake your head. It can't be Tiffany, right? So I kept playing. And then I found, we're not gonna take it. Huh? No. We ain't got it. Twisted Sister sang that song. D. Snyder could not be the guy that wrote it. There's no possible way. So I kept noodling with it. In fact, I put it into my iPad on iBand, and I brought up the bass. And I just started playing. And when you hear this, do you hear something else? See the stone set in her eyes. See the thorn twist in her side. Could it be you too? Could Bono have written the most amazing work over the last 20 years that has been copied over and over again? I mean, he single-handedly saved Africa, right? It could be him, but it wasn't. See, you can go back a little bit before him, and you'll find a band that came out of Norway that may have made this theirs. Take on me. Do you know it? Take on me. Good. Take me up. Go. Oh, that's all. I'll be gone. How about a I have no idea what this is. It was not Aha who wrote that song. They did not create the song. You can go back a little before them. This one you might buy. You might like this a little better. How about 1982? Just a small town girl. Yeah. Living in a lonely world. Get escalators. Yeah. I took the midnight journey. Could have been Steve Perry and Journey. It could have been, but it wasn't. See, you can go back out of the 80s. You can go back into the 70s. You'll find a really significant cultural event that may have been the spark for this. How about this? On your mark, get set, and go now. Got a dream, we just know. You know that? Laverne and Shirley. Laverne and Shirley. No? Okay, it wasn't Laverne and Shirley. It wasn't Laverne and Shirley. You go back a little before Laverne and Shirley. Now this one really, this I think now we may have found it. You may accept this. How about the early 70s when you had this? I find myself in times of trouble. Mother Mary comes to me. Yeah, the Beatles speaking words of wisdom. Let it be. Will that work? Paul McCartney and the Beatles? Could they have written a song that's been replicated over and over and over again? Absolutely. But they did not. Because you can go back a little before them in the 60s when the night has come. Little Benny King. And the land is dark. Yeah? And the moon. You guys know the song? Stand By Me? It was not Stand By Me. You can go back to the 50s. You can go back to the 40s, you can go back to the 30s, you can go back to the 20s. Waltzing Matilda in the 20s with the song. You can go back to the entire 1800s, the entire 1700s. You will not find the basic patterns for this particular song unless you go back to 1690, when Papa Bell stole it from the Catholic Church to write a song you've heard at almost any wedding you've ever been at, called Papa Bell's Canon. It goes something like this. Da, 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 you know that? I think EduBlogger's wrong. Create, consume, remix, and share is what it is all about. You may have heard that before. You may have thought, wow, he just stole something he was talking about stealing. Axis of Awesome, the Australian band. I've heard them do it on YouTube. And others of you may say, no, I don't know Axis of Awesome. I've heard Rob Parodian do it. He's a comedian. He goes around to a lot of schools, and he's performed this. He's also got some stuff out there. And some of you say, no, I don't know who either of those guys are. Maybe wasn't it the Chinese kids that started doing this about 6 years ago on the internet? And they really made a big deal. And some say, no, it was that British singer who plays the piano. She's been doing this for years. All of these people do essentially what I just did for you. That's not the first place I heard it. First place I heard it was right here. At Denison Elementary School, when my 3rd grade music teacher, Mrs. Luckin, used to play songs of the 70s on the piano to help us understand them better. Glenn Campbell and Elvis Presley, and she used to play the Romanesco, which are those 9 chords that are broken into just the 4 you heard. She played that for us over and over again. Then when I went to college as a trumpet major, and Gene Aiken, the legendary jazz instructor, was my teacher, he started to have us improvise to that set of chords over and over again. Create, consume, remix, and share. That's what it's all about. I'm going to stop with this story and then we'll be done. And I'll take questions or stick around or whatever I've got to do. Jay Dilley was a fire marshal back in the early 1900s. Jay Dilley was in charge of something called a coal docket. Coal dockets were pyramids of coal. And he had been put in charge of the largest coal dockets that had ever existed. They were 7 persons tall. All right? And these are the same coal dockets that they would take the coal and they would put them in engines and fan the flames of engines and stuff and try to get them moving. And he realized that of all of these coal dockets he was in charge of, that he thought there was a problem. One of those coal dockets was on fire. He knew that because there was smoke coming up through the middle of the pyramid. Now, if you think about that for a moment, you can't just take the coal off because then suddenly a lot of oxygen gets to that and it will literally explode like a bomb. And so he knew that he was in some trouble. So Jay Dilley, being the person that he was and the responsible fire marshal that he was, he went to his boss. He climbed up the stairs to go up to where the boss was, and he said to his boss, Captain Smith, captain of the Titanic, he said, Captain, we're on fire. Coal dockets are on fire. What do you want to do? Captain said, we're less than a day out of port. What do you mean we're on fire? He said, I don't know. Somehow a spark must have gotten down there and the coal docket's on fire. So the captain said, look, this is the maiden voyage of the Titanic. I can't turn around. Too many people are watching us. We've got to get across the Atlantic. Is there any way we can do it? And Jay Dilley said, I don't know. So the captain said to Jay Dilley, if I can get you across the Atlantic 24 hours early, if you put a fire marshal on there 24 hours a day with water, do you think we can make it across? And Jay Dilley said, well, Captain, we'll try. You all know the rest of the story. They avoided all of those iceberg warnings. They ignored them because they had to get across the Atlantic because they were on fire. And then it didn't go so well from there. When you know why, a lot of other things fall into place. When you know why, you can start to use Education 3.0. You can start to use education psychology. You can start to use neuroscience. You can start to use technology in ways that will change and transform education for our students at scale. I want to thank you for your time. I really, really hope this is a nice kickoff into some of the things you're going to do. But I'll stick around here as long as you want and handle questions. You can ask them in public, or if you got to go, I understand. Thanks for your time. Any questions I can answer?
Recording stopped.
I know I just said, I opened the fire hose and said take a drink, so there's a lot to digest. And you will get the PowerPoint deck when I'm done. Yeah.
Are you seeing any signs that education's about to change? I mean, lecture systems around 400 years, it took 250 years to get away from the classical curriculum. Everybody's teaching the way they were taught. Do you think we're going to change at a faster rate than we have in the past?
Yeah, I actually do, and I'll tell you a couple reasons why. Number one, there are more and more in high school specifically, but all of K-12, there are more what are called alternative schools popping up. You've maybe heard Ken Robinson talk about this, that these alternative schools really probably should be the norm.